Ronia, the Robber's Daughter, Chapter 3. Then he caught sight of her, and he laughed too. "I know who you are," he said. "You're that robber's daughter who runs in the woods. I saw you there once." "Who are you?" asked Ronia, "and how in the world did you get here?" "I am Burke Borkison, and I live here. We moved in last night." Ronia stared at him. "Who's we?" "Borka and Undis and me and our 12 robbers." It was a little time before she could take in the incredible words, but at last she said, "Do you mean that the whole of the North Fort is full of dirty devils?" He laughed. "No, there are only decent Borka robbers here. But over there, where you live, it's stuffed full of dirty devils. That's what they always say." So that was what they always said. She began to boil, but there was worse to come. "In any case," said Burke, "this isn't the North Fort any more. Since last night it's called Borka's Keep. You just remember that." Ronia gasped with rage. Borka's Keep! That really was enough to choke you. What rogues they were, those Borka robbers. And that rascal grinning over there was one of them. "Death and destruction," she said. "You wait until Matt hears about this. Then you'll see all the Borka robbers scattered with one blow." "That's what you think," said Burke. But Ronia was thinking of Matt, and she shivered. She had seen him beside himself with rage, and knew what it was like. Now Matt's fort was going to split in two all over again, she realized, and the thought made her groan. "What's the matter with you?" Burke asked. "Don't you feel well?" Ronia did not answer. She had heard enough now, enough of rascally talk and impudence. Something would have to be done. Matt's robbers would be home soon, and then death and destruction, every dirty little devil of a Borka robber would be out of Matt's fort faster than he came in. She got up to go, but then she saw what Burke was going to do. He was getting ready to fly across Hell's Gap. He was standing on the other side, directly opposite her, and now he was beginning to run. She screamed, "If you come here, I'll give you such a punch your nose will fall off." "Ha ha," said Burke, and he leaped. He was over the chasm. "Follow that if you can," he said with a grin. He shouldn't have said that. It was more than she could stand. All right, he and his dirty boots had planted themselves on Matt's fort. But no Borka robber was going to go around performing leaps that one of Matt's robbers couldn't imitate. And she did. She herself did not know how it happened. But suddenly she was flying across Hell's Gap and had landed on the other side. "You're not so bad," said Burke. And a second later he had jumped after her. But Ronia had not waited for him. With another leap she flew back across the chasm. He could stand there staring at her as long as he liked. "You were going to punch me. Why didn't you?" Burke said. "I'm coming." "So I see," said Ronia. And he came, but she did not wait for him this time either. Once again she jumped, and she intended to go on jumping until she had no breath left in her body, if necessary, in order to get away from him. Then neither of them spoke any more. They simply jumped. Frantically and furiously they jumped to and fro across Hell's Gap. Nothing was heard but their panting breath. Only the crows sitting on the parapets cawed from time to time. Otherwise, everything was deadly silent. It was as if the whole of Matt's fort were sitting there on its peak, holding its breath, waiting for something truly terrible to happen at any minute. Yes, soon we'll both finish up in Hell's Gap, Ronia thought. But then at least there will be an end to this everlasting leaping. There came Burke, flying across the chasm again, straight toward her, and she got ready to jump back. She no longer had any idea how many times she had jumped. It felt as if she had never done anything but jump back and forth across ravines to escape from Borka riffraff. Then she saw Burke slip on a loose stone lying on the edge, just where he had landed, and she heard him yell before he vanished into the depths. After that, she heard only the crows. She shut her eyes and wished that this day had never happened, that Burke had not existed, and that they had never jumped. Finally, she wriggled forward on her stomach and looked down into the chasm. And there she saw Burke. He was standing on something right beneath her, a stone or a beam or whatever it was that was sticking out from the shattered walls. There was just enough room for his feet, but no more. There he stood with the depths of hell's gap beneath him, his hands fumbling wildly for a hold, anything that could keep him from tumbling into the abyss. But he knew, and Ronia knew too, that without help he could not get out. He would have to stand there until he could stand no more. They both knew it, and then there would no longer be a Burke Borkison. "Hang on," said Ronia. And he answered with a little grin, "Well, there's not much else I can do here." But he was afraid. You could see that. Ronia tore off the braided leather rope she always carried, rolled in a ball on her belt. It had helped her many times with all her climbing and clambering in her forest life. Now she made a big loop at one end of the rope and tied the other end around her body. Then she lowered the rope to Burke. She saw the gleam of hope in his eyes as the rope came dangling down over his head. Yes, it was just as long as he needed, she saw, and that was just as well for this Borka rogue. "Get this around you if you can," she said. "Then you can start climbing when I tell you to, but not before." The storm that had struck on the night she was born, had torn a block of stone out of the parapet. By a stroke of luck, it lay not far from the edge of the chasm. Ronia lay down flat on her stomach behind the great stone, and then she called, "Start now!" And at once she felt the rope tighten around her waist. It hurt. Every tug on the rope as Burke climbed made her gasp with pain. "Soon I'm going to split in half, just like Matt's fort," she thought, and she set her teeth to keep from screaming. Then, suddenly, the strain was gone, and there was Burke looking down at her. She continued to lie there, wondering if she was still able to breathe. And he said, "So that's where you are." "Yes, that's where I am," said Ronia. "Done enough jumping now?" "No, I'll have to jump once more to get to the right side. I've got to go home to Borka's keep, you know." "Take off my leather rope first," Ronia said, getting up. "I don't want to stay tied to you any longer than I have to." He pulled off the rope. "No, of course not," he said. "But after this, perhaps I'm tied to you all the same, without a rope." "Not on your life," said Ronia. "You and your Borka's keep. Get out of here." She clenched her fist, and she punched him right on the nose. He laughed. "Don't you do that again. Take my advice. But it was nice of you to save my life, and I thank you for it." "Get out of here, I said," said Ronia, and ran off without looking around. But just as she reached the stone steps that led down from the parapet into Matt's fort, she heard Burke shout, "Hey, robber's daughter! I'll be seeing you." She turned her head, and she saw him gather himself for his last leap. "I hope you fall in again, dirty devil!" she shouted back. It was even worse than she had expected. Matt fell into such a rage that even his robbers were frightened. But at first no one would believe her, and for once Matt was angry with her. "A bit of lying and pretending may be fun sometimes, but you've got to stop this make-believe. Borka robbers in Matt's fort, indeed! What rubbish! It makes my blood boil, even though I know it's a lie." "It's not a lie," said Ronia, and once again she tried to tell him what she had learned from Burke. "You're lying," Matt said. "In the first place, Borka hasn't got a boy. He can't have any children. That's what they've always said." All the robbers sat there silent, not daring to speak. But at last Phulax opened his mouth. "Well, but they do say he has a boy, all the same. They say Undis gave birth to him in sheer terror on the night there was such a bad storm, when we got Ronia, remember?" Matt's eyes widened. "And no one told me! What other deviltry is there that I should know?" He looked around furiously, and with a bellow he grasped 2 beer tankards, one in each fist, and flung them at the wall, making the beer gush out. "And now Borka's snake spawn is taking his ease on the roof of Matt's fort. And you, Ronia, have talked to him." "He talked to me," said Ronia. With another yell, Matt picked up the leg of lamb that had been served on the long table and flung it at the wall so hard that the grease flew. "And that snake spawn claimed, you say, that his heathen dog of a father has moved into the North Fort with the whole of his robber scum?" Ronia was afraid that if Matt had to listen to much more, he would be so furious he would lose his wits. But fury was needed if the Borka robbers were to be thrown out. So she said, "Yes, and now it's called Borka's Keep. Just remember that." With a third yell, Matt picked up the soup cauldron that was hanging over the fire and flung it at the wall in a shower of soup. Lovis had sat silently listening and watching. Now she was angry, and it showed. She picked up a basket of eggs, freshly gathered from the chicken run, took them to Matt, and said, "Here you are, but you'll have to clean up after yourself, remember." Matt took the eggs, and with fearful howls he flung them at the wall one by one until the place was running with yolk. And then he cried, "Safe as the fox in its lair and the eagle in its nest. That's what I said. And now—" Big as he was, he threw himself on the floor, and there he lay, crying and shouting and cursing, until Lovis was sick and tired of it. "Now that's enough," she said. "If you've got lice in your coat, roaring won't get rid of them. Get up and do something about it." The robbers were already sitting hungrily around the table. Lovis picked up the lamb from where it lay on the floor and wiped it off a little. "It's probably only a little more tender," she said comfortingly, and she began to carve thick slices for all of her robbers. Matt got to his feet sullenly and took his seat at the table with the others, but he did not eat. He sat with his dark, tousled head in his hands and growled under his breath, sometimes giving a sigh so huge that it could be heard all around the stone hall. Then Ronia went over to him, put her arms around his neck, and laid her cheek against his. "Don't be sad," she said. "All you have to do is kick them out." "And that may be hard," said Matt heavily. They sat in front of the fire all evening, trying to puzzle out what to do. How to get lice out of your coat, or rather, how to get Borka robbers out of Matt's fort when they had gotten a firm hold. That was what Matt wanted to know. But first and foremost, he wanted to know how those snakes in the grass, those thieving rats, had managed to get into the North Fort without a single one of Matt's robbers noticing anything. Everyone who wanted to reach Matt's fort on horseback or on foot had to pass through the Wolf's Neck, and a watch was kept there day and night. And yet no one had seen hide or hair of a Borka robber. Noddle Pete laughed scornfully. "Well, what did you think, Matt, that they'd come strolling through the Wolf's Neck and tell the guard, sweet as you please, Step aside, friend. We're planning to move into the North Fort this very night.
So, which way did they come, if you know so much about it?
Well, not through the Wolf's Neck and the big fortress gate, by all accounts, said Noddle Pete. From the north side, of course, where we haven't got a guard.
No, why should we keep a guard there? There's no entrance to the fort, and just a sheer rock wall besides. Do you think they're like flies, who can climb straight up into the air, and then wriggle in through one or two narrow arrow slits?
Then something suddenly occurred to him, and he looked at Ronia, his eyes narrowed.
What were you doing up on the roof anyway?
I was watching out that I didn't fall into Hell's Gap, said Ronia. She was sorry now that she had not asked Burke a few questions. Perhaps he would have told her how the Borka robbers had managed to get into the North Fort. But it was too late to think of that now. Matt set guards for the night, not only at the Wolf's Neck, but on the roof as well.
Borka's nerve is just too much, he said. At any moment he'll come rushing over Hell's Gap like a wild bull and drive us out of Matt's fort, lock, stock, and barrel.
He picked up his beer tankard and flung it at the wall so hard that the beer splashed all over the stone hall.
I'm going to bed now, Lovis. Not to sleep, but to think and to curse, and woe betide anyone who disturbs me.
Ronia lay awake that night, too. Everything had suddenly turned so wrong and miserable. Why should that be? That Burke. After all, she had been pleased when she first saw him. And now, when she had met someone her own age at last, why did it have to be a nasty little Borka robber?